This was used for, I think, the state guidelines for the townships. But here the Alberts talked about specifically using the ISO standards, the international standards, recommendations for community noise limits. And they talk about rural areas. We live right out in the country, man, it is quiet. At night, you can't hear anything. I mean, it is really quiet. We live at the end on a lake, and no cars go by, nothing. They talk in here, daytime limit, 35 dBA. Evening limit, 30. Night limit, 25.
And was that even related to wind turbines, wind turbine noise, or was that transportation?
Totally a study on wind turbines.
Okay, yes.
Let me just kind of explain a little of the background of that. I was approached by Lawrence Tech to do a Delphi process to get a whole bunch of experts together and stakeholders to look at a number of issues. And I was hopeful that I'd be providing some useful information. Unfortunately, Dan was not able to get anybody to really participate in the process in a meaningful way to develop kind of different viewpoints and expertise. So what ended up coming out of the LTU report was basically Dan's opinions. And they weren't, because it didn't represent a broad-based kind of consensus building process, it wasn't basically seriously considered, certainly by me, because it was Dan's opinion.
So the ISO is Dan's opinion?
No, I'm talking about his recommendations.
His methodology.
There's plenty more, though, that do say things that he says that are peer-reviewed, that are...
Yeah, oh yeah, no, I'm just referring to the LTU study because, you know, a lot of people, they go, oh, Lawrence Tech University, good engineering school, it is, you know, and I was very hopeful they would give me some good input. Unfortunately, Dan wasn't able to pull it off.
Well, they also talk in here in the same study, though, about using some of the other studies that were done by, I think you had Mundy Township, where they had controls set by frequency level. And as we all know, turbines have a lot of low frequency noise, and that is supposedly a major cause of annoyance. They say turbine noise is much worse than car noise, aircraft noise, etc., at a much lower dBA. So like if you take a car noise at 60 and 70, it's equal to the annoyance factor of a turbine like at 30 because of the high incidence of low frequency noise or infrastructure. Now down in our area we have, it's all shale rock. I bet you if I ask Duke Power, have they really studied what the transmission of infrasound is going to be through shale rock? I bet you they've done no studies at all. I bet you. Because I can talk to my farmers telling me 5 miles away they can tell trains coming.
I do want us to take advantage of the fact that we have public members here. I mean, you probably won't be at the next meeting or the next, but you haven't been at our previous meeting, so I assume that. You could be. But let's keep your comments to maybe a couple, 3 minutes if you can, and I want to hear from everybody.
Before we go, could we just make sure that I want you to know that you're being heard? I want to summarize what I think I'm hearing from you is you're asking us to be more sensitive to more studies. We think we are. In that particular study that you're referencing, I think the committee members were responsive to that particular report, and that to take the findings of that report and use it to base public policy where taxpayers' dollars will be spent, I think would not be a wise decision. So in this instance, one of the things that we're trying to do and make sure that we're doing is look for recommendations we can make where the methodology and the science is definitive. And I would say you're right. I don't think anybody's done a study on sound transmission through shale rock. So is that reason enough to go to a community and say, we recommend that you put a moratorium on development or not? And that's the issue we grapple with.
Well, I think there's enough information out there, though, that would say that we need much lower noise numbers.
And so that's what your local government and your local community will be, that's the problem they will be dealing with. We're just trying to give them the tools with which to analyze this problem, and it may be something like there is a range of decibels that have been used and have been in place in the field for a long time, and that range is from here to here. And this is the closest we can do as a committee, is to say within this range, we feel comfortable to say that this is what most people are doing. You may wish to talk to your local communities to identify, concerns or research questions, or if there's something special. We don't know, for example, we're going to find out from the LiDAR project about the transmission of wind noise over water. I don't know if waves are louder than wind turbine noise, and I don't know if wave noise accentuates, accumulates, or blocks out and ameliorates turbine noise. But we're going to have some information about that in the next 2 years. But does that mean we shouldn't do wind development in the Great Lakes? Or we should let the Canadians do it and start importing wind energy from Canada along with the oil we're doing, because they're the #1 supplier of oil to the United States now is Canada. So I mean, these are the hard questions.
Specifically, I'd make 2 suggestions. Look at low frequency noise. Make sure you consider that, like the standard in here where they talk, certain cities actually have a standard at frequency levels.
Okay.
Not just the DBA, but they take every frequency.
Different parts of the frequency spectrum.
Right.
Okay.
Could John just clarify, maybe for me, maybe for the whole group, because none of us were here when the original guidelines, I know you were participated.
I'm the historian, right?
Yeah, so who else was involved in that?
I was here, but I wasn't, I gave comments, but I was around.
Yeah, actually, in this question came up this morning, and I did indicate that, they are state guidelines issued by DLAG, but I was the author, and there was no consensus in the WIN working group at that time for a whole bunch of issues, because it was a fairly large group. Lots of comments from a whole bunch of people, including Evelyn. And ultimately, I kind of took all this.
So it was a much larger WIN working group, and you distilled that down into the document?
Yes, and I wrote it up, and I sent it through my chain of command, and they said, okay, post it. Yep.
What amazes me is that you can read a kind of a paper like Dan Albert's, and somehow you come out with 55, which is like one of the highest levels that there is being used as a decibel level. So
There is no higher.
no higher.
Is there a higher?
Some states are actually using 75.
75?
We should mention that we've looked at multiple states' sample zoning ordinances and in countries around the world also.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But some foreign countries are using levels as low as, I think, 35.
Yeah, that's correct.
But they're not law.
They're based on certain observations, though.
This lady's had her hand up for a while.
Okay,
She's trying.
go ahead.
Cliff, I know I didn't hear who you represent.
Orosol Energy.
Okay. And I know you're not to blame for everything that's.
I know, everyone, I know, I'm the only developer, so everyone's gonna yell at me.
But you are
Target on your head.
you are the person on the committee representing the developers, and I,
Well, no, I represent Orosol Energy.
okay,
What is that?
We're a developer, utility scale wind and solar developer,
okay.
based on Ann Arbor. I can give you my card after.
What I want to point out, and so you can remember this and understand the context and the way at least my comments are generated, and as I said this morning, I retired from the commission. I've done energy efficiency and energy conservation work for, 34 years or something like that, for my full career. So, and now I'm living in Benzie County with a proposed turbine on my property, which I haven't signed a contract for. What I want you to understand.
They can't put a turbine in.
No, I know, but I mean, that's the proposed. They haven't discussed it with a shed, and they probably know not to. But the point that I want to make is, there is not a tremendous, and this isn't for you personally, there is not a tremendous amount of trust between residents who are having to deal with these issues. I've saved my whole adult life for this house in Benzie County. There's not a whole lot of trust with the industry. And whatever input you have with other companies, but also for your own, you need to understand that when Evelyn talks about who's going to pay for the studies, you're putting a lot of the people who may have legitimate, serious concerns about violations of the local ordinances at risk at not being able to do anything about it because they simply do not have the finances to fund half of the study. And so that just creates a greater chasm between, you know, the developers who want community support to put the wind in, and the public that's saying, wait a minute, I don't trust you as far as I can throw you.
So who does the public trust? Who do they trust?
I'm not sure right now. I
Myself,
think each other,
This commission,
but,
You got local elected officials?
right, maybe.
You
But
have-
in some cases, you have to understand, Mark, in some cases, the developers come in and sign with the local trustees first before it's ever raised anywhere else. And those
Where there's
con-
no zoning.
Where there's no zoning. Which-
That's
true in our-
I don't think that. We don't,
Yes.
we definitely don't target, my
Okay,
company
well,
doesn't
but
target.
let me finish,
But,
let me finish what I'm
No,
saying.
I else, you said something about, wait, okay, go ahead.
So what I'm saying is, I think it's important for developers to keep in mind, every step you take has the
Oh,
potential
I'm fully aware.
to pull in the public and pull in the residents in support of the grand idea of wind development and reducing our dependency on foreign oil. Or drawing, you know, a line in the sand and having people say over my dead body.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And so I want you to keep that in mind when you're telling Evelyn or whoever that the cost of the study has to be split. That's.
I didn't say that.
You didn't say that.
Oh,
He
no,
just
that's
didn't
what
want
you
to
have to-
I didn't want it, I didn't want it to be open to
Oh.
infinite.
yeah.
Right,
Right,
and, but
because-
there are ways to put that in and say
Yes, there are.
X number per year.
Sure, sure.
And bundle the complaints together and do a couple of studies a
You know,
year.
that'd be, I'd like to have the language from you on that exact same,
Mhm.
how that should be done.
But I just want you to keep in mind, you know, I know you're aware that there's a lot of animosity and there are a lot of steps developers can take to create confidence in the public as opposed to creating hostility.
Well, I
And
fear.
Yeah, every project is different. I mean,
Right,
we're developing multiple projects, and every population has a different culture. And some projects, our Gratiot counties, you know, they seem to be very pro-wind. I mean, I haven't heard many complaints come out of that community. I mean, there's other communities that are completely different. So it's also a cultural thing too, I believe.
well, it's a trust.
Yeah.
So I just want you to keep that in
But
mind.
Invenergy, I mean, the company that's doing Gratiot County, I can
Really?
mention their name. They, I mean, they do projects all over the country, and I know they've had projects that face tons of opposition, they have projects that go off well, so it all depends on there's multiple factors that go into the public
And
acceptance.
this isn't a criticism of you, it's just something that I think
I'm the
needs.
developer.
Let's have a comment from Mr.
Couple things. First, just to make comments you two, in our township, Alfred Township, Oceana, the wind developer did come in, he brought in the supervisor, the board, and the major landowners, went around signing contracts and secrecies for 2 years before it ever became public, before the ordinance was ever written, with all these promises. So that does happen, and it's very common it happens. As far as the complaint resolution that you're talking about, making language to, Ron Rand and others have done studies that if your decibel level is below, and maybe Dr. Punch could comment on it, if your levels are below 30 dBA, you'll have basically no complaints. Between 30 and 34, you'll have sporadic complaints. From 35 to 39, you'll have 5% complaints from residents. From 41 to 45, you'll get 15 to 20%, and above 45 to 50, 25% complaints from residents. So if you really seriously want to have good language on complaint resolution, it purely lies in your noise levels and your setbacks. If you don't want a bunch of frivolous complaints, lower the sound.
Oh, I agree, but
It's that simple.
where do those numbers come from?
This is from Ron Rand.
So.
They're also
we
the World Health
review-
Organization, I think.
What we've heard from a
Most
number of
the
organizations also is that below 40, you certainly won't have complaints because you won't have any wind farms on it. The economics will not work.
My point in our county is what I say is, let's build the wind facilities safely. If it can't be built safely amongst our 55 homes, then they can't be built safely. Then we gotta start looking at the 20,000 square miles of state land and put them on those lands where there are no residences. We're not against the wind turbine facility. We're against getting our lives destroyed by
So,
noise, by
You're not
whatever. So let's just
anti-wind,
do
you're
it.
pro-health.
Or pro-health,
So
yeah.
let's, can we go back to your first comment, in terms of the process that it has gone through? What do you feel that could be changed, and how could this be changed, so that, are you suggesting that there is something that